Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Well, it seems like we have another nuclear verdict on our hands when it comes to the trucking industry, and it has got me thinking. These massive courtroom payouts, sometimes tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, are not just affecting the parties involved, but they're starting to affect everybody around as well. What are they? Why are we seeing more of them? And how does that change the way we operate in the trucking industry? That's what we're going to be unpacking in today's video. Ready? Let's go! So first things first, what is a nuclear verdict? Well, it's a legal term for jury awards so huge that they blow up expectations. Think $10 million or more, way beyond what typical damages are. Now, in our industry, these types of verdicts, more often than not, result from crash-related lawsuits where a truck is involved. Plaintiffs start arguing negligence, that's their favorite term. Either it was because of speeding or poor maintenance or poor training, and then the jury goes ahead and drops the hammer. Now, these aren't your average fender bender settlements, of course. They are a game changer. And most of the time, unfortunately, these verdicts are against the trucker or the trucking company. So why is this happening? Number one, there are those aggressive plaintiff attorneys, and I'm sure we've all seen these billboards at least at one point where it says, oh, have you been involved in an accident with a truck? Call us. A lot of firms use tactics like the reptile theory, which basically appeals to people's survival instincts. And a byproduct of that is it paints all big rigs as a menace to the public. Number two is public perception. Unfortunately, big rigs get a bad rap, and this is in part because of these crazy nuclear verdicts. But if there was a crash between a car and a semi-truck and you were to ask a random person, well, who's at fault? Guess who's the villain? And number three, of course, bigger vehicles, bigger damages. Crashes that involve 80,000-pound trucks, of course, will result in catastrophic injuries most of the time. So juries will go big. It's kind of like a perfect storm, and unfortunately, it's not slowing down. Now, if you're curious about the data in nuclear verdicts, yeah, there's data to back it up. The American Transportation Research Institute actually created a trucking litigation database with 600 cases spanning from 2006 to 2019. Now, when they were looking at the timeline, they saw that in the beginning of that timeline, there were about 26 cases that were over $1 million. And then as they were getting closer to the end of the timeline, those 26 cases turned into 300 cases with over $1 million verdicts. And the average verdict size jumped 51% from 2010 to 2020, according to the American Transportation Research Institute. Now, unfortunately, like I said, it's not slowing down. And just since 2024, we have seen multiple nuclear verdicts, from the $141 million verdict in Florida to a company that hasn't even operated in 2 years, to a $47 million verdict against Schneider. And just this week, another nuclear verdict was reported by FreightWaves, where a food delivery truck driver rear-ended a woman's car. Thankfully, no one died. They were hurt, and the Los Angeles Superior Court awarded more than $21 million to the defendants. So the question, of course, is what is the effect on the trucking industry as a whole? Unfortunately, nuclear verdicts, when they happen, they don't just hit one company or only the people involved. They kind of ripple out. First up is insurance. When the jury drops a 10, 20, 50, $100 million bomb, of course, insurers foot the bill. Or at least they try to. As we all know, insurance premiums have skyrocketed in recent years. And in 2023 alone, that increase was 12.5%. And part of the reason, a very big part, is because when an insurance company decides to insure you, a trucking industry professional, they also understand that if something happens, you are going to be held responsible, no matter the circumstances. Now, for owner-operators and small carriers, this this is brutal because their margins are already razor thin considering the rates, the fuel expenses, and the increased cost of maintenance. And here's the kicker. Some insurance carriers are bailing altogether because they consider the trucking industry way too risky. And fewer insurance carriers means two things. Number one, higher prices, and number two, yeah, it's going to be a little bit harder to find coverage. Now, of course, there's also the payout portion. For a small carrier or an owner-operator, a $10 million nuclear verdict pretty much means bankruptcy. But unfortunately, that's not where it stops. According to FreightWaves, and I quote, if a carrier doesn't have enough insurance or assets to collect, plaintiff firms are going upstream and targeting the truck and trailer makers in an attempt to collect damages. That's exactly what happened with the lawsuit against Daimler and the lawsuit against Wabash, where Daimler was slapped with a $160 million verdict and Wabash was slapped with a $462 million verdict. You know what's crazy? In the case of Wabash, a small car crashed into the back of the Wabash trailer and the passenger and the driver were not wearing a seatbelt, and now the manufacturer is being held responsible. It's unbelievable. But nuclear verdicts are not only hurting people's wallets, right? They also change how carriers enforce rules and how truckers roll. Safety has always been key, or at least I like to think that most carriers care about safety. However, now it became the life or death of your career. One bad crash and you could be slapped with a lawsuit, even if you were not at fault. So fleets are, of course, doubling down in response to these nuclear verdicts out of fear of being sued. I mean, let's be real, dash cams are everywhere now. But the worst part of nuclear verdicts, something that I have noticed, and I'm sure a lot of you guys know as well, is that no matter how safe you think you're being, you're following all the rules, you're doing everything correctly, you are never safe from a lawsuit and from being found guilty. And the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, the Werner case, where a Werner driver, was driving below speed limit going one direction, and across the median heading in a different direction, a pickup truck spins out of control, crosses 42 feet of grass, and ends up hitting the truck. That crash unfortunately resulted in one death, one person being paralyzed, and two people being injured. But in no way was this the trucker's fault. But when it went to court, guess what? They found the carrier, Werner, liable, and they slapped them with a $100 million verdict. Or let's take the Wabash case, for example, where the verdict was over $400 million. How do you take that information as someone who operates perhaps Wabash trailers? Are you now responsible for something happening just because you are operating a trailer that is involved in a nuclear verdict case? Do you have to now sell that equipment and buy other equipment? Unfortunately, no one knows. So yeah, guys, these verdicts are definitely much more than just like a wow moment when you're reading the headlines. They are far-reaching, they have horrific effects on the industry as a whole, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining and watching today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. See you in the next video.